I've been sitting in the cab of a crane for 30 years. I've lifted everything from HVAC units the size of school buses to delicate glass sculptures that cost more than my house. When you operate a friction crane or a 300-ton hydraulic crawler, you aren't just a guy pushing levers. You are a mathematician, a physicist, and a meteorologist all rolled into one. You have to know the wind shear, the ground bearing pressure, the deflection of the boom, and the exact center of gravity of a load that's swaying 100 feet in the air. If I make a mistake, people don't just get hurt, they get turned into past tense. I take my job seriously. I'm union. I'm certified on every piece of heavy equipment you can name, and I have a safety record that is spotless. That was until the company I worked for, a specialized heavy lift outfit in Chicago, was bought out by a private equity firm. The old owner, a guy named Mike who could operate a crane better than me, retired to Florida. In his place, the firm sent down a new operations manager. Let's call him Bradley. Bradley was 30 something. He had an MBA from a school I'd never heard of, a suit that was too tight, and a pair of pristine, unscuffed work boots that cost $500 and had never touched mud. Bradley didn't know the difference between a load line and a tag line, but he sure knew how to read a spreadsheet. And according to his spreadsheets, our safety protocols were bleeding revenue. The trouble started on a Tuesday. We had a massive job lined up for a client building a cutting edge data center. The lift was a custom fabricated cooling tower. This thing was a beast. It weighed 48,000 pounds. The issue wasn't just the weight, it was the reach. The cooling tower had to go onto the center of a roof, which meant I had to park the crane about 90 feet away from the placement point. In the crane world, we use something called a load chart. It tells you exactly how much weight you can hold at what distance and angle. It is the Bible. If the chart says you can lift 50,000 pounds at an 80-foot radius, you do not try to lift 50 soles of 1 pounds at an 81-foot radius. Physics does not negotiate. I had put in a request for the Liber LTM 1400. It's a massive mobile crane with enough counterweight to handle the reach safely. It's expensive to rent and expensive to transport, but it was the only machine for the job. I had spent 2 days calculating the pick plan, factoring in the outrigger pads, and the soil density of the site. I was in the trailer reviewing the charts when Bradley walked in. He didn't knock. He just slammed a folder on my desk. OP, he said, his voice dripping with that fake corporate cheerfulness. I was looking at this rental order for the Liber. That's a $20,000 rental for a 1-day pick. That's insane. I looked up, taking off my reading glasses. It's a heavy pick at a long radius, Bradley. That's the machine we need to stay within 85% of the chart capacity. It gives us a safety margin. Bradley rolled his eyes. Safety margin. You guys and your margins. I found a cheaper option. The rental yard has a 100-ton rough terrain crane available for a third of the price. I canceled the Liber and ordered that one. I felt the blood drain from my face. You did what? Bradley, a 100-ton RT crane cannot make that lift. The counterweight isn't heavy enough. At a 90-foot radius, that crane's capacity drops to like 18,000 pounds. The load is 48,000. You will tip the crane. You're just not being creative, Bradley scoffed, leaning over my desk. Get closer to the building. I can't. I explained, trying to keep my voice level. There's an underground retention pond right next to the wall. If I park 100 tons of machinery on top of that, we'll punch through the concrete and sink the crane. I have to set up past the retention zone. That's why we need the reach. Bradley waved his hand dismissively. The charts are conservative. They build in a huge buffer for liability. If you're a good operator, you can finesse it. Just override the computer limiters. I need you to be a team player, OP. We need to get the margin up on this job, or corporate is going to be looking at headcount reductions. That was the threat. Do something illegal and dangerous, or get fired. I'm not doing it, I said, standing up. I am not signing a pick plan for an overloaded crane. It's illegal It's against OSA regulations and it will kill someone. Bradley's face turned red. I am the operations manager. I am telling you to do your job. My job is to lift things safely. What you're asking for isn't a lift, it's a crash. If you bring that RT crane out here, I'm utilizing my stop work authority. Bradley laughed, a cold, nasty little laugh. Stop work authority. You think you have power here? You're a lever puller, OP. You're a dime a dozen. If you won't do the lift, I'll find someone who will. In fact, he checked his watch. Pack your stuff. You're done. I'm terminating you for insubordination and refusal to perform duties. I stared at him. He was serious. He was actually firing his lead heavy lift specialist 2 days before the biggest pick of the year because I wouldn't break the laws of physics. Okay, I said quietly. I want that in writing. Reason for termination: refusal to bypass safety limiters and overload crane. Fine, he spat. He typed it out on his phone, emailed it to me, and smirked. Get off the site. I packed my bag. I took my certifications, my personal logbooks, and my radio. As I walked out to my truck, I saw the delivery low boy pulling up. Sure enough, it was carrying the smaller, cheaper crane, and driving the pilot car was a guy I recognized. Let's call him Scab Steve. Steve had lost his certification 3 years ago for dropping a bundle of rebar through a school roof. He was a freelancer who worked for cash and didn't ask questions. Bradley had evidently been planning this. I didn't just go home. I went straight to the coffee shop across the street from the construction site. It had a nice, big window with a perfect view of the data center. I sat down, ordered a black coffee, and opened my laptop. I forwarded Bradley's termination email to the union rep, the state OSHA safety board, and the client's safety officer. But I knew government wheels turn slow. The crash would happen faster. The lift was scheduled for the next morning. I showed up at the coffee shop at 6:00 a.m. I set up a tripod with a video camera. Call it insurance. Through my zoom lens, I watched the setup. It was a disaster. Steve didn't even use the large steel mats to distribute the weight of the outriggers. He just threw down some wood dunnage on the soft dirt, strike one. Then I saw them rigging the cooling tower. The tower was huge, a shiny silver box worth about $200,000, custom built in Germany. If this thing broke, the data center couldn't open on time. The penalties for delay were something like $50,000 a day. I watched Bradley walking around in his clean vest, pointing and shouting. He was rushing them. He wanted the crane off, rent by noon to save another half-day charge. Steve swung the boom over. I could tell just by the angle that he was maxed out. He started to cable down. The riggers hooked up the load. I held my breath. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The computer inside the crane was screaming at Steve right now. It was telling him Ovaro AD. But Steve, being Steve, had likely turned the key to bypass the safety lockout, just like Bradley wanted. The engine revved. The cables went tight. The massive cooling tower lifted 6 inches off the ground. So far, so good. The crane took the weight. But the physics of a crane change as you swing and boom down. Steve hoisted it up about 30 feet to clear the parapet wall of the roof. Now came the hard part. He had to boom down, lower the angle of the arm to reach out to the center of the roof. As you boom down, the radius increases. As the radius increases, the leverage against the crane multiplies. I zoomed the camera in. I saw the rear outriggers of the crane, the legs that hold it steady, start to lift off the ground. Just an inch at first. The crane was teetering. A smart operator would have dropped the load instantly. But Bradley was on the radio, waving his arms, signaling him to keep going. Get it on the roof? I could imagine him screaming. Steve boomed down further. The rear outriggers shot 3 feet into the air. The center of gravity shifted past the tipping point. It happened in slow motion, but it was violent. The entire crane tipped forward like a toy. The boom smashed into the parapet wall of the new data center, crushing the brickwork. The cooling tower, swinging wildly now, smashed into the side of the building. crumpled like a soda can, and then fell 3 stories to the ground, exploding into a mess of aluminum and copper piping. The crane itself didn't flip all the way over. Thank God, because the boom caught on the building. But the crane was now resting diagonally, its wheels 5 feet in the air, the boom bent at a 90-degree angle, embedded in the structure of the building. Silence. Even through the glass of the coffee shop, I felt the silence. Then the sirens started. I sat there, sipped my coffee, and saved the video file. I waited. My phone rang 11 minutes later. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. Finally, I picked up. Hello, it's Bradley. You need to get back here. Right now. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. I don't work for you, Bradley. You fired me. I have the email. Refusal to perform duties, remember? Listen to me, he shrieked. We had an accident, a bad one. The crane is stuck on the building. The fire department is here, but they don't know how to stabilize it. The load is gone. The owner is screaming at me. Steve ran away. He literally jumped out of the cab and ran away. I need you to come operate the recovery. I leaned back in my chair. Bradley, that sounds like a very expensive problem, but you hired a scab to do a professional's job. Why don't you ask your spreadsheets how to get a bent crane off a building? Please! The crane rental company said they won't send a recovery team for 4 hours. The building engineer says the structure is buckling under the weight of the crane leaning on it. If we don't get the pressure off in the next hour, the roof might collapse. You're the only one certified on the heavy lattice boom needed to lift the broken crane off. We have the big liber down the street at another site. We can grab it, but I need an operator. Oh, I said, smiling. So now you want the liber, the one I ordered, the one that was too expensive. Yes, yes, just come help. All right, Bradley, here's how this works. I am no longer an employee. I am an independent contractor. My rate for emergency recovery consulting is $1,000 per hour with a 50-hour minimum, paid up front. Plus, I want a signed letter admitting that my termination was wrongful and that the accident was due to your direct override of safety protocols. $50,000. Are you insane? The roof is collapsing, Bradley. Tick-tock. I heard muffled shouting in the background. Someone, probably the client or the building owner, was tearing Bradley a new one. Fine, Bradley screamed. Fine, just get here. Wire the money. I'll send you the routing number. I don't move until I see the confirmation. 5 minutes later, my banking app pinged $50,000. I walked across the street, finishing my coffee. The scene was chaos. The police had taped everything off. The client, a very wealthy developer, was standing there with a face like a thunderstorm. Bradley looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He was shaking. I walked up to the police line. I'm the recovery specialist, I said. Let me through. The recovery took 2 days. We had to bring in up to 300-ton cranes to lift the broken crane off the building without causing a total collapse. The damage to the building was in the millions. The cooling tower was a total loss. The delay penalties for the data center opening ended up costing the private equity firm over $4 million. Bradley was fired before the sun went down that first day. The client actually had security escort him off the property because he tried to blame the wind. There was no wind. I ended up staying on as a consultant for the rest of the project. I negotiated a new contract directly with the client, bypassing the private equity firm entirely. The best part, when OSG did their investigation, I handed over the video from the coffee shop and the email from Bradley. The firm was fined heavily for willful negligence, and that $50,000. I bought a nice boat. I named it the Margin. Every time I take it out on the lake, I raise a toast to Bradley and his spreadsheets. Because in the end, physics always wins, and cheap can be very, very expensive.